day to day and ordinary, but we can just call up anyone in another European Union country without paying extra for our phone calls. Now that philosophy has also been seen in the way we've combated COVID, the pandemic, and combated Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And we have also seen Europe grow with this essential social component. And that is something we saw in the common procurement of vaccinations and the social shield to be able to deal with the consequences of the war in Ukraine. Europe closer to Europeans, Europe closer to all Spaniards. That is why this minimalist design of the logo, which is the visual identity that has been created for this presidency of the EU Council, reflects the aspirations there within Europe. Clarity, simplicity, and transparency. This also forms part of that spirit of being close to people, to being closer to institutions. You'll see this summarized in these pictures. To be able to take the presidency closer to citizens and our commitment to the EU too, we will be presenting to you a website. You'll see it up here, www.eu2023.es. And of course, we will be on social media as of this afternoon. That website will be available to you, and to explain the priorities of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the EU, we have the President of the Spanish government, Mr. Pedro Sánchez. Thank you very much, Marta. If you wouldn't mind, the first thing I'd like to do is thank all of you who have made this video possible, those of you who have been working hard in our presidency here in Spain throughout the last year, together with all of the ministers of the government of Spain, vice presidents, ministers, ambassadors, representatives, diplomats, media representatives here today with us at this event. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. As you well know, and Marta said this herself just a moment ago, and I think you've seen that too in the pictures in the video, Spain is a deeply pro-European country, and it is because Europe is a reality that draws us together as a nation, that unites all of our citizens, from the youngest to the oldest, and it is a reality that has helped us to turn our country into one of the most prosperous and advanced countries in the world today. We are what we are thanks, to a certain extent, to Europe. Europe was our gateway to modernity, and also the gateway, the path that led us to democracy in this country, and it will certainly continue to be the path that will lead us towards the best future. And that is why we are taking on this rotating presidency of the Council of the EU with a twofold feeling. One, a deep sense of gratitude, and two, a deep sense of responsibility. If we cast our minds back to the last time that Spain held the honor of this presidency of the EU Council, well, it was in 2010. 2010. So many things have happened since then. We've had a financial crisis, Brexit, the worst pandemic of the last century, and a devastating conflict which unfortunately, is still there on our eastern border, and that has led to more displaced people and refugees than the First World War. In each one of these crises, I do remember particularly the COVID-19 pandemic and the humanitarian, social, political, economic impacts of the war, there have been many voices that have been raised predicting either the demise of the European project or the weakening of the project. And there have also been many, many anti-European parties that have gained political ground and even presence in our institutions. Nevertheless, Europe has been stronger than all of them. Europe has come through the different crises and it has emerged from them stronger than ever before. Today, the European Union is more united than ever. Of course, naturally, that does not mean the challenges are all behind us, nor does it mean that we need to simply be self-complacent about things. Today, the international order is changing. The boundaries separating technology from everything human are also moving. The very way we see the role of the state, business, the nation state is also changing. The guiding principles of economic life and its relationship with the environment through the climate emergency are also changing. And at the very heart of all of those changes, what is at stake here is the welfare of our citizens, their wages, their jobs, gender equality, and the freedom that our fellow citizens will enjoy in the future. And that is why Spain, our country, is taking on the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, as I said before, with that feeling of gratitude and humility, but also, and I do want to say this too, with ambition, because we are determined to make this presidency a useful instrument that will improve people's lives. As we said in the video before, to do even more for Europeans. And to achieve that, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to describe to you and list the 4 priorities of the Spanish presidency. So I think they're very much aligned with the key concerns of all our fellow citizens. First of all, we need to reindustrialize Europe. And that means we need to guarantee, to secure that open strategic autonomy. Secondly, we need to adapt and to take the green transition, environmental adaptation further forward. All of those answers that we're coming up with to the energy crisis needs to be consistent and fully aligned with that greater response that we need to provide to the climate emergency. Thirdly, we need to consolidate the social pillar so that Europe is a project and a political commitment with more social and economic justice. And fourthly and lastly, we need to strengthen the European Union. Now I would like to just summarize for you briefly each one of those priorities. As I was saying, our number 1 priority has to be to drive the reindustrialization of Europe and secure its open strategic autonomy. I think over the last 4 years, we have learned a lot of lessons about the deindustrialization process in Europe and the consequences and the weaknesses, the shortcomings that we have built up as a result. In any event, let me say, if I can, that opening up to the world outside the European Union has been one of the key drivers of the EU's economic and social progress over the last 5 decades. Empirical evidence tells us that opening up internationally has made us more productive, more innovative, and more competitive. And it has been a huge source of new jobs and more prosperity for all citizens in Europe. However, it would be naive to deny that opening up internationally of the EU has also had negative consequences. And we've seen those consequences in the evident, obvious scarcity of face coverings, face masks. That was something we faced during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. The primary consequence, negative consequence, is that this opening up has facilitated delocalization, relocalization processes that have led us to lose strategic sectors and industry and have led us to be overly dependent on third countries in energy and health. And we've seen this with Putin's war in Ukraine, also overly dependent on digital technologies and food in third countries. Now, the geopolitical, technological, environmental changes that are taking place, the transformation that we're seeing, both within and outside our borders, those huge disruptive changes are providing us now with an opportunity to turn around that trend, to invert it, to recover those industries that we've lost, and to attract other new industries, and to generate wealth in our territory, and to reduce external vulnerabilities. We're facing a momentous change, technological change in our times, and we need to ensure that we remain united in the EU in the view that we take with Spain with regard to the digital transformation and AI. And we need the right framework that protects our values and our rights, that allows us to have a more humanistic approach to ensure that our fellow citizens feel sure and confident when we are facing extraordinary uncertainty in the world. And I think European Union is starting to emerge in the eyes of the world as a safe, friendly place that has all of those necessary ingredients to be able to lead the way forward in the economy of the future, talent, innovation, and an exceptional geopolitical position, I would say, institutional stability, clean energy, a state-of-the-art infrastructures, and a top-notch business ecosystem. And if we do things right in this decade, I think that the European Union could turn into a benchmark, a model to be followed in the production of renewable energies, electrolyzers, digital connectivity services, advanced robotics, biofertilizers, and latest generation pharmaceutical products. And I'm just listing just a few examples where Europe has a huge potential and upside if you compare Europe with our competitors. And for that to happen, our presidency will work on two different fronts, everything to do with this open strategic autonomy. Firstly, what we want to do is promote those dossiers that will allow us to foster the development of strategic industries and technologies in Europe. We'll be driving innovation and the industrial policy of Europe. I mentioned that before, a more integrated single market too, but also those files, those dossiers that will allow us to broaden out and diversify our trading relationships with third countries and to strengthen our supply chains. And to really work, that strategic autonomy needs to go hand in hand with a strategic opening up. And that opening up, and this week actually, we'll be seeing the head of the European Union Commission, the president there in Latin America, signing agreements about critical commodities that will be imported for that ecological transition, digital transition. And I do think, as I said before, that in that approach to strategic opening up, we need to say it's crucially important, not because we're Spain, but because we're Europe, to that summit between the EU and CELAC that will be held in mid-July in Brussels. Secondly, moreover, we will be proposing to the Council a common strategy that will allow us to guarantee the economic security and global leadership of the EU between now and 2030. It will also allow us to take the work done by the European institutions and the roadmap agreed in Versailles to be continued and furthered. It's a strategy that we have been putting together since September last year, working closely with about 80 ministries in the 27 member states of the EU in what I would call an unprecedented forward-looking collaborative exercise in Europe. Ultimately, our goal will be to guarantee that leadership, that resilience and pivotal role of Europe in the new global order that is being forged, because only in that way will we be able to guarantee the security and future prosperity of our citizens. Binary thinking about the power of China and the United States, I think, are behind us now. Europe, EU, needs to become the big architect now, the great architect of the international order, the new order. The second priority, I would say, would be to move forward towards the green transition and environmental adaptation. There are two important summits, the 2030, the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals conference, and of course the Climate Change conference. And I think the green transition and environmental adaptation need to be a top priority. Why? Because first of all, we need to halt climate change, environmental degradation. All of us, all European countries are suffering this. It's a process that has speeded up and has become more intense over recent years. That is why it is not only a legal obligation that we have, it's also a moral duty. We need to be aware of the fact that this challenge, and if we get ahead of this challenge, if we adapt to this challenge, could become an opportunity for prosperity for all of us on this continent. If we really do implement properly and do it right, this green transition, it will help us to drastically reduce our reliance on energy and commodities in the EU. It will also substantially cut what we're paying on our electricity bill. I'm thinking of the citizens and how much we're paying because of the war in Ukraine. It will allow us to save on up to 133 billion euros in fossil fuel imports by 2030. And I think it would also make our companies more competitive and our economies more competitive. And thinking about jobs, it will allow us to create about 1 million jobs in this decade through this green transition. I think we all know that Europe is leading the way forward in this global race to sustainability, and the embargoes against Putin, far from holding back our decarbonization process. In fact, it's they have made it speed up. In fact, over recent years, the last 2 years, the EU has gradually disengaged from its dependence on Russian gas and oil, and it has increased by 39% its solar power installed capacity and 40% in the case of wind capacity. And we're taking important steps forwards towards interconnections and circularity of processes. And the Spanish presidency will do all it can to make sure that this forward momentum towards sustainability continues. The ambassadors know that there is still this reform that has to be become something tangible with regard to renewable energies. And we will push forward with this reform together with the autonomous community, asking them to cut down electricity prices and to improve a system that we have seen over the last few years that has suffered. It has been quite, I would say, something that has gone up and down, trying to be politically correct to what I say about it over the last few years. We will also try to move forward quickly with the legislative files linked to Fit for 55, the gas and hydrogen package, energy efficiency regulations. We'll also promote measures to reduce waste and microplastics, to design sustainable and repairable products, and the generation of green fuels. All of this, we'll do all of this so that the EU can continue to lead the way forward in the global fight against climate change, and that it should do so creating wealth and new opportunities right across the EU. The third priority has to be consolidating the social pillar, achieving more social justice and economic justice in Europe. In the future, it will not be enough for European GDP to keep growing. We will have to ensure that that wealth that is created reaches everybody, the great majority of our citizens. That means that we will have to change many different things. We will have to break away from that trend that we've seen over recent decades, the fact that company profits not always have been used to reduce inequalities and to help the man in the street, the woman in the street. They need to help us to improve our opportunities and make sure that the economy is more competitive, and it's not in contradiction to say fairer and more solidarity minded. And also we have to ensure that we reinforce the revenue base underpinning the welfare states, so we can put an end to all of the avenues for tax evasion that are being taken by the big fortunes and companies. Tax evasion every year costs Europe 1.5 percentage points of its GDP. That is the same amount that it invests in building public social housing and protecting the environment. So the question we have to ask today, we have to ask ourselves, is how can we ask our fellow citizens to pay their taxes if many multinationals don't do that? And I think the Spanish presidency will set out as a target putting an end to that injustice, and it will try to set some minimum standards for corporate tax in all member states, particularly in digital businesses, and to combat tax evasion and the use of shell companies. We also have to make a commitment to a proper review of the 2021-2027 multi-annual financial framework. And just to end on this point, we would like to support changes or reform in fiscal rules which allow countries to have their house in order, and also to have the money to be able to pay for the digital transformation and green transformation. We will also have to continue to work to consolidate the European social rights pillar to make sure that the labour market is fairer. What we will do here as the Spanish presidency will be to work on several reforms that will help to broaden out and guarantee the rights of workers in different labour areas, ensure that we promote those files to improve the protection of vulnerable groups in society, such as children, women who have suffered gender-based violence, and people with the disabilities, and all of that in the framework of the 2030 agenda that this government is fully committed to. And the EU has, of course, committed to promote that agenda through the 17 SDGs. And lastly, the fourth priority has not to do with current circumstances, but also strategically and structurally. We have to strengthen the unity of the European Union. In a world of giants with growing geopolitical tensions and uncertainties, the EU needs to remain united if we are to make Europe exactly that, one of the key architects of the international order, the new order. The sovereignty of member states, of course, has to be respected at all times. But only by learning to think together and act together as one single front will we be able to overcome the challenges of our times. That is why Spain, this country, would also like to take advantage of the fact that it's holding the EU presidency to be able to promote a furthering of the single market, to also complete the banking union and the capital markets union, and the development of a sustainable financial agenda and the consolidation of common instruments such as the next generation funds that are certainly doing a lot, not just to buffer us from the impact of the Ukrainian war crisis, but also to improve our productive fabric. And at the same time, we will be working hard to optimize the decision-making processes. We will also try to ensure that we can take those debates further, those debates that will mark the future of the EU, such as the upcoming strategic agenda or the migration and asylum pact. And on this point, then, I have to, of course, make mention of that terrible tragedy that we saw yesterday in the Aegean Sea with all of those human beings lost their lives in the sinking of that boat. And I think this dramatic, tragic event once again calls on us as democratic societies, as Europe, to act. In Europe, we will continue in parallel to support Ukraine and other countries that would like to join their future to the future of the EU. European peoples, we're very different, aren't we? But at the same time, we are just one single people. We have similar values, common aspiration, and that is why more than ever before, we need to continue to move forward in unity. And apart from those four priorities that we will be driving forward, Spain will also have the honor of hosting and coordinating negotiations at the highest level on a whole host of vitally important issues, and we will make sure that we can push towards the approval of dozens of files that will end up becoming laws and specific measures. And this will not be done by turning away from our citizens. It will be done hand in hand with our citizens. We don't want to do all of this behind closed doors, in closed buildings in the capital city. Quite the opposite. Our presidency will be guided by one idea, and that is proximity. And you can see that here in the map behind me. It'll be the very first time that a lot of these summits will be held all over the country, nationwide. All of the autonomous communities in Spain will host at least one ministerial meeting, and they will be able to show the delegations and also European public opinion the wealth that we have in this country and the diversity that defines Spain as a country. In addition, there will be a fantastic cultural and outreach program that will be on offer, and it will allow all citizens to participate in the EU presidency, and also, why not say it, enjoy it. So, dear ambassadors, dear fellow countrymen, fellow countrywomen, we as Spaniards, I said this at the beginning of my presentation, believe in Europe. Over the last 4 decades, the European Union has done a lot for us, and now the time has come for us to show the whole world out there just how much we as Spaniards can do for the EU. On the 1st of July, we'll be opening up the doors of our country, of our cities, of every single institution here in Spain to our European brothers and sisters. So let's take full advantage of this opportunity to show them our gratitude and our affection, but also the greatness of a country that has grown, that has become a modern country and is now stands on an equal footing with the most advanced member states. We're very excited about this presidency. We think that we can bring that impetus for transformation into Europe before we get to the 2024 European elections, and we will do everything we can to push forward the future of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Since the press is today with us, and I also take the opportunity to thank the presence of the international media here today, Carmen, you have the floor, and let's open up a Q&A. Thank you very much, President. We're going to begin with an international media, Hans Christian from Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Thank you. You have spoken about the migration challenge. What is going to be the weight of migration, irregular migration or undocumented migration, and what is going to be Spanish stance to forge the asylum agreement based on the recent Brussels summit? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans, for that question. I think the presidency, and I was able to meet in the Moncloa the Prime Minister. I think we have been able to move forward. We're very happy about the fact that this has momentum. And Spain has done a lot. Well, the Minister of the Interior, Minister Velasco, has done a lot to say that there is 2 procedures here. One is asylum, and the other is the management of asylum and immigration. These are the 2 agreements. Of course, in that crisis, there's a crisis management part 2 that is also very important. We're working on that too. And before this semester comes to an end, we would hope that we will see that the agreement on migration will finally be signed and sealed. It's so important for all of us. We had our own vision, of course, on every single one of these issues. And as we are a country which is the gateway into Europe, we've always said that Europe cannot be divided on this point, because we are all victims of illegal immigration. We are all facing and should face the problem of migration, immigration together. And we've always advocated this when we've talked to the European Commission, and I've spoken to my counterparts, that we have to also talk about the international side of migration, to be able to put an end to the work of these mafias, these groups that are trafficking in people. We have to collaborate with the countries that are suffering from this immigration. We have to work together with the countries of origin and of transit, and that has always been what we would like to contribute to this discussion on migration. It has to be a balanced debate, of course. Sovereignty is also important here, but there is the position that has been established on 2 points. That is the regulation on asylum and the management of asylum. And that was a great success of the Swedish presidency, rather. And we are hoping to see the crisis management regulation more fully developed in the future. We're working on that, and hopefully the overall agreement will be closed and completed this semester.
Carlos Coe from the El País newspaper. Thank you. President, you were talking about the minimum taxation standards, and my colleague from Frankfurt was asking about migration. I have several questions. We have upcoming elections in Spain. What is going to happen with these actions if there is a change in government? I don't believe you have reached consensus on these topics. What is going to be the effect of a change in elections, and are you going to engage in discussions with the leader of the opposition to come to a common consensus? And the second element, one of the hot topics in Europe is what to do with the extreme right in Europe. There are different ways to tackle it. There is an alliance in Italy, and my question is, are you considering an alliance between the possibility of an alliance between extreme right countries?
Thank you very much, Carlos, for those two questions. With regard to domestic political issues, if you wouldn't mind, I don't want to answer the questions on them today for quite pretty simple and obvious reason. This is we're already within the electoral processes that are underway, and the governing body for the elections already stated exactly what sort of state we can make from institutions. Here we're in the Palacio de Moncloa, and here also we're here to present the EU presidency. Democracy has never been a problem. No, it's not the first time that there have been elections held during the presidency of a rotating presidency of the EU, or even a government changing. The important thing to highlight here is what we have been saying all along, and I said this at the start of my presentation, that this work has been ongoing for over a year now, and all stakeholders or social, political operators have been involved in that work. Not only have the ministers actually spoken to Parliament, but the EU Joint Committee has also prepared a statement on the priorities that will be carried forward by Spain's presidency and the political institutions as part of that presidency in Spain. So with regard to the dialogue that we have with institutions, we've had that dialogue for over a year. We've been working with every single one of them. Then the question about anti-European political forces and how they are growing. That's bad news for Europe. But if there's anything that we've learned from the pandemic and also now from the war, is that we have to be stronger together. We have to join together. That is why that fourth priority that I mentioned earlier on is so important. And that is that we need to be more united as EU member states to be able to tackle those common challenges that we have, that are the challenges facing all of our societies. And so if there are political movements that question or deny those challenges, such as the climate emergency or that common response to any real definite threat that we might have, that we do have on the eastern border, because that is a questioning of our borders, our security borders for Europe. Well, that all adds up to bad news for Europe. But there will be time, certainly, for me to answer your questions about domestic politics. There will be other press conferences, I'm sure, to be able to get back to you on that. Then the question about tax standards, about the elections, I think we've answered those questions.
Alonso Soto from Bloomberg, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, President. The recent ratification of the Mercosur Treaty has been a very important topic during your mandate. Given the upcoming elections on the 23rd of July and the recent adverse conditions faced by Lula, do you believe it's still feasible to sign up that agreement in 2023? And the recent uncertainty ahead of the upcoming elections in Spain can debilitate the progress in the field of the Green Deal and the taxing rules? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. Let me take that first question first. Let me start off by telling a story, an anecdote. When we started to think about holding that EU CELAC summits, well, one of the very first approaches to this was that we had to host that summit in Spain. But then very quickly we realized that we were talking about a strategic relationship between Europe, the European Union, and the Latin American Caribbean community, and that that meant that it was more important for it to be held in Brussels, in the capital of Europe, and not in Spain, even though Spain would be holding the rotating presidency, because we are already a country that's very close to Latin America and the Caribbean, just as we did with Africa and other parts of the world. I think it's great news that this will be the very first summit the EU will hold since 2015 with CELAC, with part of the American continent. I think we have so much in common with that continent. And I'm not just thinking about values and political interests, but I'm also thinking about the way we understand the multilateral system in the world and how we tackle a lot of those global challenges that we're facing today. That is why it's wonderful piece of news. I think that a lot of progress will be made as we move towards more strategic cooperation with that structured dialogue between the EU and CELAC, so that will be a regular dialogue established, just as we have with other parts of the world. Secondly, it will also set out that public investment roadmap that will visualize, I think, or make visible that commitment the EU has with that part of the world. And lastly, and the President of the EU Commission is there in the region as I speak, we'll be strengthening all of that everything related to that open strategic autonomy, that the whole idea there, and I was talking about that earlier on in my presentation. It's absolutely vital that we complete 3 commercial agreements, one with Chile, one with Mexico, and the Mercosur agreement. And if that isn't done, then we will take steps forward to ensure that sooner or later we will be able to have one of the biggest shared free trade areas in the world today with the EU. And then the third question. Here in Spain, and I think there are many governments that hold the same position also in the European Parliament, we don't think that we can look away. We can't simply stick our heads in the sand like the ostrich. This is a reality that we're facing. The desertification, water scarcity, fires, wildfires. We have to come up with a coherent, consistent response to those climate events. And I've always said that here in Spain, everything that we can do for energy and for the environment has to be consistent and coherent and fully aligned with the overarching challenge, which is the climate emergency.
Virginia from Mediaset. Good morning, President. I would like to ask you related to the fact that if there is a turning a government behind the elections, apart from the changes in the Popular Party, is there any specific protocol in order to pass on all of these policies that have been put together, everything that you have recently informed us about? Is there a protocol to pass on and hand over these actions? And on a second note, what do you believe is the image vis-a-vis the European Union right at the turn of this presidency, that autonomous regions such as Galicia that forge an alliance between the Popular Party and the far left Vox?
As I did also say to your colleague Carlos Q, I'm not going to get into any domestic politics questions. There will be other events, the formats, we'll be able to take up those questions for you because when we talk about our domestic institutions and the autonomous communities. Let me say first of all then, you have to remember that the Spanish presidency of the rotating presidency of the EU, the fact we hold it, it means that we will also be there to build bridges, to try and move forward and complete dossiers that are there. We're not putting forward those dossiers. They're already there in Europe. We have the asylum agreement and everything linked to workers' rights and digital platforms. There's a whole host of different dossiers, different files out there that Spain has to give momentum to be able to bring them to completion in the second semester of the year. But let me stress again, our role as the country that holds the rotating presidency of the EU Council is not to actually put forward anything new, but also but take these to a successful end. Thank you very much, ambassadors. Thank you to the ministers and vice president who have joined us. Thank you to the team that has made this event possible. Thank you to everyone who's made this venture ahead of us possible. Thank you to the media for joining us today.